Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. We have our college football playoff matchup set. Georgia playing Ohio State 1 versus 4, Michigan, TCU 2 versus 3. Going to talk a little bit about how the rankings played out, what the committee might have been thinking, whether Alabama deserved to be in it. Before we do, though, again, just want to say thank you guys for all the support you guys have shown the channel. Again, if you like talking ball, consider subscribing to the channel. We love having conversations with you guys in the comment section, and the support has meant a lot. Dill, I'm going to kick it off to you. What are your early takes here?
I think this is overall the right four. And I think the one spot that could have possibly been argued is obviously 3 and 4 with Ohio State and TCU. And if you're going to ask me like just an eye test as a Michigan fan, I'd much rather play TCU than Ohio State because I know Nick Saban's on trying to beat the table. Oh, it's a bad loss. Ohio State has a bad loss, what he calls like a big margin of victory or loss, I should say. If you watch the game, Ohio State's obviously very much on par with Michigan. Like that game could have been very close, and you're right, it did get away at the end, but like throughout the game, it was razor tight. And I mean, the issue, the other side of that though, is TCU has like an objectively speaking better looking resume. Just from a pure resume to me.
That's the biggest discussion. Well, I mean, Georgia 1, Michigan 2, that makes sense. No argument there. And then TCU, Ohio State, Alabama, how you decide the order of that. The best argument for TCU and how the college football committee has come out and said how they evaluate teams is resume. TCU is 5-0 against top 25 teams. Alabama, I think, has only beaten 2 top 25 teams. They have 2 losses they didn't play in their conference championship game. Now, the argument that would best support Alabama getting in, and the argument that Nick Saban talked about was both those losses were last play of the game type thing with an unhealthy roster, Bryce Young not being 100%, and then simply just the eyeball test, the power rankings test. TCU, Alabama play on a neutral field. Who are you taking? I think it's really hard to argue that TCU would be the favorite in that game.
Well, that's the problem because like TCU is objectively – in my eye test too, it certainly says Ohio State is certainly better than TCU. And I think Alabama, I personally think people are wildly disrespecting TCU in pumping Alabama. Like it's not Alabama from back in like 2016 where they were just really good every year and you roll it out and they dominated. Like they've not looked great throughout the whole year, healthy or not. So I don't know. I still think TCU is like good, and you can. I think you can make an argument that Alabama would be the favorite, but I think it's way closer with those two teams than like a Nick Saban's trying to.
And then the best argument for TCU is look, we played the same team, and we're not into doing kind of the evaluating game for game, but TCU plays Texas in Austin. Alabama plays Texas in Austin. One team looked like a significantly better team, and that was TCU. I mean, TCU really took it to Texas. Yeah, they didn't put up a ton of points, but Texas could not move the ball against that TCU defense. I think when it all comes down to it, the committee got it right, and they were forced to get it right. You know they wanted to throw Alabama in there for the TV ratings. It would have been probably better football, but at the end of the day, you can't – it would set a bad precedent to penalize TCU for playing in a conference championship game.
Yeah, and then you're basically just saying you're doing it off of history because if you just I feel like I'm like being gaslit by the whole world to think Alabama's good. Like Alabama hasn't looked great. I don't get it. Like they didn't beat the brakes off of an Ole Miss team that's pretty weak. They obviously lost to an LSU team that I don't think is great. I think they're good, but they're not great. And they lost to Tennessee again, a team that got their doors blown off by South Carolina. So there's a lot of holes in this Alabama like facade that it's
and part of it had to do with preseason rankings. Like everyone, including myself, had Alabama as the national champion favorite. I thought Alabama would go 15-0. If you would have asked me before the season, like pick a team that's going undefeated, it would have been Alabama. They just did not play. Like you look at both sides of the ball. Bryce Young was okay, but the rest of that offense sucked. Like the wide receivers were not playmakers. Jahmyr Gibbs was okay, but the offensive line was not great. And then the secondary, the very, very talented secondary, had multiple games where they were just getting broken down.
I don't get why that team can't play like really good defense. It makes no sense to me because they're like pretty loaded, but they don't.
And then
play defense.
The other biggest flaw with Alabama is I think they were missing kind of that elite receiver that they've always had, whether it be Jameson Williams, Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, John Mechie. They just didn't have a playmaker for Bryce Young to build that chemistry and big plays. Like, where are you going to? And Cameron Latu was kind of the guy at points for Alabama because they didn't have a player. Jahmyr Gibbs as well. Like, they were the best pass catchers on the team were running back and tight end because they didn't have any wide receivers. I think end of story. The committee got it right. Now I want to get into a little bit of the matchups, and then we'll make separate videos on actually breaking down these matchups. Georgia-Ohio State, I think, is going to be a great game. I think if there's one team that's really going to push Georgia, I think it can be Ohio State because no team is really going to match up with Georgia and bang bodies kind of on the offense and defensive line. But this Ohio State team, like, where did Georgia look vulnerable against LSU in the SEC championship?
Deep
in
pass.
The secondary.
Yeah.
Ohio State is going to stress you, especially if they get some of those guys back. Travion Henderson, Jackson Smith-Njigba. Those guys got a whole month to get right. You'll have Marvin Harrison Jr., Julian Fleming with CJ Stroud. Like, this team, if there's one team that can really push Georgia where they might not be as strong, it's probably Ohio State.
And the problem with Georgia is, like, I feel like they've been able to cover up secondaries that are good but not, like, on par with the rest of their defense. Their defensive line, I was surprised they couldn't just dominate up front against LSU. And Jalen Carter, he's exceptionally good, like one of the best players I've ever seen in my life. But I don't know that they have enough else around them to take a game over like they did last year. Because I don't think the secondary was great last year either. But their front seven was so good, and they were just suffocating. And they're not doing that this year. So it does make you think, like, that Ohio State team would have gotten boat raced by Georgia last year. I'm kind of with you. I think Ohio State might be able to give them a game, at least make it a shootout, because Georgia's going to score. But
Georgia will score. Whether Ohio State can keep up, I think they can. Not having Nolan Smith, not having Trayvon Walker, and then not being able to blitz your linebacker. Like, Nakobe Dean, Channing Tindall, Quay Walker, like, blitzing last year was elite for Georgia. They haven't really had that. And the defensive line, from a pass rush standpoint, hasn't been that great, or hasn't been as good as it was last year. So I think Ohio State will have a shot to kind of make it a game. Flipping to Michigan TCU, as Michigan fans, those got the glasses on. And this is the perfect matchup for Michigan, I think. I mean, TCU kind of runs that three-down lineman. They kind of play that bend but don't break, and they've been giving up over 4 yards per carry. Kansas State was running the ball pretty well on them. I think Michigan, Donnie Edwards gets that cast off. I think Michigan's going to be able to run all over this TCU team.
This is the matchup I wanted for sure. And again, like, I know we opened up with it, but Ohio State's a much more dangerous team than TCU. I think, like, position group to position group, just a wholly somewhat more talented roster, I think. And I'm not trying to take away a ton from TCU because I'll probably be one of their biggest defenders. I just think that out of these four, TCU is who you want to play. I mean, because they're a team that they've won every game, but they haven't looked convincing for the most part.
They're the Michigan State of last year. Like, Michigan State, there's something you can say about winning, going 5-0 in one-score games like Michigan State did last year. But, like, at some point, you can't just have coin flip after coin flip after coin flip, because those coin flips are going to start not going your way, and that happened to Michigan State last year. It happened to TCU yesterday when they lose the coin flip to Kansas State at the end of the game. And from a matchup standpoint, you got to love it. Like, TCU, not very good against the run. They don't really try to be that great against the run. I think Michigan will be able to run the ball very successfully against TCU. And then on the flip side, Max Duggan can be an absolute baller at times, but there's at times where he goes cold, and I think this Michigan defense will be able to, like, what you saw and how they handled that.
I'm hoping we can put the pressure on them that Kansas State did. Like, Kansas State took them out of their element, and so did Texas, frankly, when Texas played them. When you can be an aggressive defense and put some pressure on them, and I will say Michigan's pass rush looked like coming alive a little bit in the Big Ten title game, as much as it maybe looked a little lost against Ohio State. But again, if Jesse Minter can get them off their spot and make them play, not let them just check balls down and play that pass game they want to play, similar to, honestly, probably how Purdue wants to play a little bit, I think Michigan should be okay. And again, TCU is a great team, so it's not like I'm like, oh, thank God we're playing this scrub. But out of these four teams, I think I'd most want to see TCU.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the committee got it right. I think this was the four teams, and I think it's the right way. I think letting Ohio State jump TCU from just sitting on the couch, I think that's the strongest argument, is you shouldn't be penalizing these teams that much for making their conference championship and then losing.
Unless they went and got like waxed if they lost
like USC did.
But it's like exactly.
Even like I wish that they put Ohio State above USC, which I think there'd been a very strong argument to keep Ohio State at 4. And then if USC had won that Pac-12 championship game, then you jump them to put in 4. But they didn't do that. But it's really hard to see USC lose to the same team twice and look as bad as they did on the defensive side of the ball and say they're a top 4 team just from the eyeball test. They have 2 losses now. I think the committee got it right.
No good wins. Like if you look at it, if we're just going to make a case for USC, they haven't really. They kind of avoided the deep part of the Big 12. They had to play UCLA, but that's about it. They didn't see Oregon. They didn't see Washington. So I think they missed out too much of the meat of that schedule to get in with 2 losses.
Yeah, and again, you can't look that bad on the like if you're the committee and you're saying, "Oh, let's put USC against Georgia," like yeesh,
they're the worst defense in the country.
They might not register a single tackle that whole game. Like you just throw the ball to Brock Bowers, and I don't know if USC will be able to bring you. You had trouble against Dalton Kincaid and the tight ends from Utah. Try tackling Brock Bowers and Darnell Washington. It ain't gonna happen. The committee got it right, and as college football fans, we said this last week. We are in for a pleasure of a game for Georgia Ohio State. That game is going to be really fun to watch. I cannot wait for it. And then Michigan, our Michigan Wolverines get a great matchup. Electric, can't wait. We got a month to get right. Everyone's going to be healthy for it. This is going to be a very, very, very fun December 31st. We appreciate you guys for checking us out, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.